And I'm gonna teach you how to make a nice light pillowy gnocchi. This is pretty much perfect every time if you just follow these steps. What we're gonna do is we're gonna make the dough, we're gonna test it and make sure that it floats, it tastes good, and then we'll roll the rest of the dough out. We'll cook it off, and then once it's all cooked off, I'll show you how to make a brown butter sauce. It's an awesome sauce that you can make super easy. Let's get our water on the stove and get this up to a boil so that once we have our dough ready to go, our water is boiling and then we can test our pasta. Get your 00 flour. We're gonna measure 1 1/4 cups of flour. And then we're gonna use the exact same amount, 1 1/4 cups of Parmesan. Let's take our eggs and then in a separate bowl, give them a little whisk. Once we're ready, we're just gonna throw that into our flour and Parmesan mixture. And then we're gonna zest some lemon. You can choose to omit this. This is just for flavor. The other thing that I also like to use in this recipe sometimes is some chopped chives can be really nice for a little bit of an onion flavor. By zesting the lemon, it gets the most intense part of the lemon flavoring. So it's a lot more intense than the juice itself. So if you really want to give something a nice lemony flavor, whether you're making a cake or a sauce, to really intensify that flavor, even a lemon vinaigrette, zest the outside of it and then throw that in. It will really intensify your lemon flavor. And then we're gonna add 1 teaspoon of salt in the dough. If your pepper is already ground, I would say probably about 1/4 teaspoon. And if you have a pepper mill, give it a couple twists. And then finally, the last ingredient that's gonna go into this bowl is our drained ricotta. This ricotta, it's a full fat ricotta. It tends to be richer and there's not gonna be a lot of excess liquid that's gonna come out of it. So if you don't have a lot, that's fine. I probably have just like 2 or 3 tablespoons that came out of mine. We're just gonna throw all of that in there. By draining the ricotta, that removes the moisture from this dough. The less moisture we have, the lighter it's gonna be. Have your sheet trays ready. We're gonna have one, we're gonna put the dough on, the little gnocchis on, and then as we cook them, we're gonna put them on a second tray. We're gonna start mixing this dough, scrape the bottom, and then fold it over so that you're making sure that you're getting all the bits on the bottom. The trick with gnocchi is just to have a very light touch and not to overmix it. So that's how we're gonna achieve a nice light pillowy gnocchi. It might look a little dry at first, but just keep mixing. See a little bit of streaks of the ricotta. I'm gonna kind of smear it a little bit to make sure that ricotta is all evenly distributed, but it looks like it's pretty well mixed at this point. And then you want to very liberally dust your board or your counter. Throw a good amount of flour. Because this dough is sticky, we don't want it to stick onto our surface. I'm going to dump this onto the table. And you might want to have a little bit of flour for your hands and just pat the top of this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut it into 6 pieces. And then each piece we're going to roll into logs. So I'm going to actually flour the top of this. It's pretty sticky. Cut it in half, and then cut each half into thirds. We'll end up forming 6 logs of dough, and then each log of dough we're going to cut into about 20 pieces. Now this is the fun part. We're just going to start with one because I'd like to test this before I go ahead and roll it all out. We're going to test it to make sure the seasoning is correct, and then we're also going to test it to make sure it floats. So we're just gonna roll this out into a log, about 3/4 of an inch in thickness. The shape of the pasta is very critical in gnocchi, and smaller is always better. These aren't dumplings, and they're gonna expand a lot as they cook. So you'll be surprised at how much they're gonna kind of puff up as we cook them. Once you have one log nicely rolled out, we're gonna cut them into 1/2 inch pieces. We're just gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna cut them. And we'll get about 20 pieces out of here. And then we'll throw a couple in to test. So hopefully your water is now boiling. Show you what it looks like to shape a gnocchi. This is what's called a traditional gnocchi paddle. It has little ridges in it. It's quite fun actually. You take your gnocchi, roll it off the board, and then you have this nicely ridged little pasta. If you don't have a gnocchi board sitting at your house, probably most of you don't, you can use the back of a fork and you can just use the twines and kind of roll it over the twines and you'll get some nice little ridges. And what the ridges does is it helps capture the sauce. The third technique, if you don't want to use a fork, you can just take your thumb and do a little indent in there. But I think what's fun about the gnocchis is these little ridges and shapes. So if we have about 6 of them ready to go, you're going to want to have your second sheet tray somewhere near your stove. when you fish them out, you have a nice landing place for them. I'm going to throw a nice pinch of salt into this water. Let's call it about a teaspoon of kosher salt. Knowing the doneness of gnocchi is very key. The key is to see the gnocchi float, and then we're going to give it about another minute, and then we'll scoop it out. So I'm going to throw about 6 of them in here, and I just want to test it for the seasoning and then to make sure that these guys are going to float. If they don't float, then we've done something terribly wrong. These guys have been cooking for about a minute. I'm going to pull them out, and then we'll just give them a second and we'll test one of them. So one of the things you'll notice too is we cook these off in batches. When you first pull them out of the water, they're going to be really puffed up. As they sit, they start to shrink a little bit. That's totally fine. As you cook them and put more heat on them, they'll start to puff up again. If you want to adjust the seasoning at all at this point, you can always gather all your dough back up together, add a little more salt, add a little more lemon. So I like to kind of streamline my process. So I'm going to roll out each of these pieces of dough into ropes, and then we'll cut each rope, and then we'll shape each piece of gnocchi all together. Each time I'm getting a new piece of dough, I'm adding a little more flour to my board just to make sure this dough doesn't stick. We just want to have shapes of gnocchi that are similar in size. Give all of this a nice little dusting again, just so it doesn't stick. And then I'm going to chop them into these little pillows. We're going to get 20 pieces more or less. Just make sure they're about the same size. All this gnocchi is now cut. Go ahead and do the gnocchi roll. We're going to cook these off in about 4 batches. We could probably put them in a bowl if that feels more comfortable to you. And then we'll slowly drop them into the pan. That's about 1/4 of them. I'm going to dump those into the boiling water. As soon as they start to float, let's give it about another minute, and then we'll start fishing them out. So that's been about a minute. Pull those out of there. And make sure that your water comes back to a boil before you add your next batch. And then we're gonna repeat that process 2 more times. While you're waiting for your gnocchis to get cooked off, make sure your sage leaves are all picked off. We're gonna use about 12 leaves. If you wanna rip them, you can. Remember we zested the lemon, we have another half a lemon. I'm gonna go ahead and juice that, and we're gonna add that to our sauce. This dish is very rich, so we have a lot of cheese, we have flour, we have butter. Any acidity will always help balance the flavor out. Put the butter on the stove, about 3 tablespoons. Throw in a pinch of salt, about a teaspoon. We're gonna melt it slowly. As soon as we start to see a little bit of color on there, like a very, very light brown, we're gonna add the sage leaves. And so as the butter starts to brown, the sage leaves will fry in this butter. You can hear them, they're gonna start frying because there's water content in these leaves. Once this butter browns, we're gonna need to get the gnocchis in there, and we're gonna give it a nice toss. Starting to get a nice color. We're gonna throw this all into the sauce. And as you throw them in, you can either saute them like I'm doing, and you can see that they're getting nice and coated, or just grab a spoon and coat them, and you'll start seeing them browning. I really like the browning of them because you get a nice crispy outside. We'll throw a little bit of lemon juice at the very end just to season them. Perfect. Finish them with a little bit of your Parmesan, both for flavor and then also for appearance, and then just for more cheese because all pasta is great with cheese. If you want to put a little extra fresh pepper, if you're into that, you can put a little more fresh pepper on top of them right now, and then you're ready to go.